In the last half hour of today's lecture series, we will have a discussion, a panel discussion. And before we start with that, I'd like to introduce the panel discussion, by the way, will be with the speakers, as you've heard, so with Christina and with Carla. And we will have, with Koosje, and we will have Carla Wilkins joining for this panel discussion. Carla Wilkins is trained as an architect, and she has worked as a lighting designer in New York City, Cologne, and Berlin. She also is a founding partner of Light Vision, where she oversees both concept and planning. And Light Vision is an award-winning independent lighting design practice, has about 35 employees with offices in Berlin, London, Hong Kong, and Shanghai. And it creates design-oriented lighting solutions that are innovative, sustainable, and people-based in close collaboration with architects, investors, and operators. Carla also frequently lectures on lighting design and is a member of the International Association of Lighting Designers. And yeah, I don't know, Carla, before we start with taking any questions, can I invite you to give a brief vision on what has been presented in the preceding lectures and your daily activities, how important are these bright days, dim or dark nights? How important are they already in architecture, and how are they considered in architecture? And what do you consider important takeaways from what we've heard right now in the presentation so far? So perhaps Carla.
Yeah, I would be delighted. I might be. Can you see my screen?
We can, yes.
Lovely. Can you? Oh, are you seeing the full presentation? Because I'm sorry about that.
I think it's okay. We're seeing the full presentation.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe as an introduction, our office is working international, and I think it's like all lighting designers. We have the approach, we are very often working in an urban environment, and this is like the westbound in Shanghai, and we were doing like the promenade to the river, and one of the goals was really to be more human scale. I have the little poetic touch. We are competitive to the high-rise building who are really doing the dancing and the singing. But mostly the important thing is that we enable the view and the poetic of the location. Another point is really office lighting. We had a little quick talk about it, and I think the new kind of working, that it is not like only to have the open space and people are sitting on their workspace. No, it's more that it is like communication, having these long characters and having these different lighting scenes is also engaging the working environment. And we had that discussion. That was the control room we were doing. And this is really something where we had the discussion with the Fraunhofer Institute. How can we engage shift workers who are for a long time have to be very, very focused on the work, because every mistake you are doing, it's really very horrible. So we had to backlit ceiling, and one of the thing was not only that we have this shift of light color to have a scene to bring a little bit of relaxation in it, but it was also an interesting thing that it is not only the lighting, it's also the little bit of disturbance you have during you are in your environment. If you're looking outside, sometimes if a bird flies by, it's setting the scene and you are again awake and alert. So this is also happening with that. It's like a big media screen, which we had on the ceiling. And I think this is also as reference to Koosje talk. It's a landmark in Saarbrücken. So this is in Germany. It's about the view. And I think this is for us very important that things have to be glare controlled. It's not always you have to lit everything up. It's more how can you bring the functionality, the security for the people, that people feel safe, that they have that poetic, touchy moment. And of course, they have the view and also have the view to the dark sky. And I think we as lighting designers have to be extremely responsible, not only for the good feeling of the humans, but also of the insects, the birds. And the good thing is really that this is being more present. I think it's very easy if you have like such an environment like this one, you can be really reduced. But my question to Koji would be really, how can we, from your point of view, doing the lighting design in an urban surrounding where after we had COVID, everyone is desperate and carved for social life, being outside, having the singing and the dancing. And I think that will be a challenge. What is your comment on that one?
Oh yeah, I really like the examples you've just showed, Carla. I think it's a very good point. We are, of course, more comfortable ourselves in light. It's just our instinct as well. So, but I think we also have to try and step away from our first instincts and try out some different scenarios as well, because often the streetlights, you could have the numbers and you could still have a very livable location, and sometimes it can be preferable as well because it can create a lot of glare. But I really like the example you showed, and I think there are many smart solutions with like lighting less and like lighting in a subtle manner that actually considers this. So indeed that you only light part of the structure so that it comes out beautifully, or that you use reflective surfaces, for instance. I think those could be very good first steps. And of course, lighting only where you really need it, and particularly not in locations where there's a lot of wildlife out there. Maybe also flexibly helping and turning off lights during key migration periods for birds, for instance. There's now some big initiatives in the States, especially. You may have seen them, where they have a sort of bird radar where they predict bird migration, and they call on city planners, companies, everyone to basically turn off lights during those nights of key migration. So that could be, I think, good ways to mitigate the damage for others than ourselves.
Yeah, I think lighting has been more, in a way, dynamic. LED technology allows us with lighting control and digitalization far more options than in former times where it was switch on, switch off, doing 50%. So I think we have a strong responsibility also to educate our surroundings, our clients. I would also have one question for Christine. Is you mentioned this, no, that was Luc. Sorry. It was for you. I had the question. You said like natural light and artificial light is not comparable. But lighting designers very often mimic and say like, oh, we are doing something similar, and we know we are cheating in a way. But we are more sensible about the spectral characteristics. And is that something what you would recommend, that this should be like the same importance like the lux levels?
Yeah, I mean, I think Luc has presented that we now have really recommendations for the melanopic lux, and I think this is a very good starting point. But I like to think that artificial light can only, come as close to the natural light as possible, but probably not be better than natural light. And especially if you think about photopic lux, then it's going to be very difficult to mimic a bright summer's day. also, in addition, you know, sunlight, when we talk about, for example, vitamin D production, then natural sunlight has effects that go well beyond even things like melanopic lux and photopic lux. And of course, what we must not ignore is that when we're outside in the sun, then we also feel it on our skin because, you know, it's warm. We are often in the nature, which also may have positive effects. We often have physical activity in addition to light, whereas when we have artificial light, then we might just rather be working. So I think there are different levels on which artificial natural light differ. And of course, lighting design nowadays can come quite close to, or relatively close, let's say, in comparison to earlier, to natural light. But I mean, who has an office designed by a lighting designer, right? I certainly don't. But I have a large window. So
step one.
Yeah. So I'd say that it's probably safe to say that for the majority of people, natural artificial light is not comparable to natural daylight.
Yeah, for us, it is really something. I mean, as a lighting designer, we are doing this design. We are also looking at the daylight component as well as the artificial lighting component. And ILD is, as our association, we try to educate people that lighting designers have that background, or they are educated to make people aware that it is not only light on, light off. It has the non-visual effects as the visual effects. And I learned that even this third receptor is only 20 years discovered. Science is still exploring what is the impact of that third receptor. And I think we as lighting designers, and I think that is the interesting part, is we are normally doing the visual part. And once in a sudden, we are in the responsibility of the non-visual part. And I think, what would your advice for us as lighting designers and lighting community, especially on the non-visual part, and how can we be more alert, not only to do the nice scene setting, but being aware of that?
I just like to make a short comment. I think that in architecture, very frequently we are not benefiting fully from the potential of daylight due to the shielding and the blinds that everyone is using as to maintain visual comfort and and not be annoyed by glare from daylight entering a building. And I think if we could optimize the glazing in a way that we allow the daylight to enter the building without the annoying aspects of daylight also entering a building, that will be a great achievement that helps to make a visual environment indoors, which is more resembling the outdoor light levels, without the discomfort that you could expect from very sunny and directional sunlight within a building, which makes it very often shield from that daylight there, so that we need to work with electrical lighting. And I think that optimizing the daylight benefits in indoor environments without the annoying visual discomfort part of that will be a great achievement. And I don't know what, probably collaborations of architecture and lighting designs and optimizing this is a very important instrument.
Yes, I think the lighting approach, light in as daylight, is wonderful, but it has also the impact of heat. So so the architects and we lighting designers, it is like always to have the best visual light implications in the indoors and keep the heat as much as possible outside. And everyone loves the perfect view to the outside. If we would ask the audience who prefers an office place next to the window, I think the most will agree to have that. But I think you are right that would be one of our main approaches to do it.
I'm also having a quick look at the questions that we received in the chat and checking which ones have a few more likes. I think we had a question on that received a few likes. Let me see. Yeah, for healthier daylight and dark nights from Letitia Moreau. Would you please mention the interest of keeping our clocks more aligned with natural solar time and no more change times, no more time changes, but also time closer to solar time. In Germany, for instance, UTC+1, or in France, UTC+0. Thanks. Is there? I mean, I don't know. Is this something someone would like to comment on in the panel?
I think people, it's a really nice question, but I think people, it's super relevant to indeed adjust your own light dark cycle and activity pattern to the real light conditions out there. I think culturally people already do this because Spain is often considered in this case, right? Like their actual Central European time is way out of whack with their natural time, but people already start, well, they have already adjusted their own schedule, work life usually.
Yeah, I think there are also reports in time zones that people living more on the eastern part of a time zone are generally slightly more healthy and have a slightly better sleep quality and a lower risk of all kinds of cancer incidences as compared to people living on the western side, so on the sunset side of a time zone. So that would argue for having as much as possible morning light and be as much as an early bird as possible, that this probably is what nature has intended humans to live in, and probably is more healthy as compared to more being an evening type and an old type.
And I think with regard to what we've discussed here, this is still so how the importance of aligning the mid of the solar time with 12 o'clock. So this importance in comparison to having a let's say more ancestral light exposure type. What is more important there is not easy to say. So I think in a circumstance where we still have this, and I mean, us individuals can't really change that. You know, Spain is actually in the wrong time zone, for example. Then one would probably still recommend to have as much light exposure during the day and as little light exposure during the evening. So that is something I think we as individuals can now change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It would also be nice if we probably had more ability to ourselves adjust our own timing, right? We were less forced to stick to a culturally approved timing schedule.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, yeah, I think if we would only live in natural daylight, you see that everyone becomes more of a morning person, and also that there is less variability in sleep timing across the population. And so in a way, you could say that living with the natural light-dark cycle probably is most healthy for humans. But of course, our social obligations and economic activities are sometimes conflicting with that intention. I'm just checking whether there are more questions in the Q&A. Some of them have already been answered by typing. There was one question that received a few likes on the threshold value for melanopic effects and what time is needed for the different effects. I think that's a very good question. Typically, the dose-response relationship that was underlying or a strong argument underneath the recommendations applied for light exposures that were of duration of more than 2 hours. And typically one would expect that if you have a shorter light exposure, that you need a higher illuminance or intensity to achieve the same effect, provided there is no saturation. But in general, I think the intention is to try to maximize the daytime light exposure as much as possible and have that threshold throughout the full daytime. Whereas in the evening, we know that especially in the last 3 hours before bedtime, that light is particularly effective in shifting the circadian clock, so delaying sleep and also suppressing melatonin. So that's an important time frame during the last 2-3 hours before bedtime, not to have too much light exposure. And and in the morning, by the way, the same applies. The first morning light usually also is acting more strongly on the clock usually, so shifting the rhythm as compared to light exposure later in the morning or even midday. But in general, I think the idea is that any light exposure during the day, during the period that it's normally light, is beneficial to strengthen health and circadian rhythms and improve human performance, provided people are indeed day active.
I think there was also one question for you, Luc. What effect does wearing sunglasses outside have on the amount of light that enters your eye? For example, is it still worth going for an early walk on a bright summer morning if you wear sunglasses?
I'd seen the question. I think it's a very good idea to have an early morning walk. Definitely is something which increases your morning light exposure, and that is what we need in a way to speed up our clocks that in most humans are a bit too slow. So having morning light definitely is good, and taking a morning walk is also very good. Typically in the morning we have even the light exposure outdoors is much higher as compared to what we would receive indoors. So if you wear a sunglass, typically the light exposure, depending on the filtering of the sunglasses, is still about 20% of the light is still reaching the retina through the sunglasses. And I think since more than the light exposure typically outdoors is 10 times as high at least as the light exposures indoors, I would say that definitely having a morning walk is a good idea, irrespective of whether you wear sunglasses or not. So any light exposure that you can have in the morning and in a visual comfortable way is definitely serving proper alignment of circadian rhythms and optimizing human health and sleep for day active people.
And also regarding mood, there are findings suggesting that especially morning light might be especially effective in improving mood.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Correct. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm checking what I don't know what did.
I also really liked Marijke's question, actually. She asked what light intensities you could find outdoors. And I did learn that street lights in urban environments, when you're walking on the street, tend to give out 5 to 10 lux. I thought it was interesting, Luc, because that also matches up sort of with the upper limit of the maximum recommendations for the evening lighting, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, correct. Yeah, but I think that the street lighting conditions typically they are measured. The illuminances reported there are on the road surfaces, and typically you could say that the vertical exposures that people get at their eyes are roughly half. Depends on the directionality of the fixtures, but they're roughly half of the illuminances that are reaching the road surfaces, and that means that I mean, of course. There is some light exposure, but probably we need light to see and to navigate the streets. So being in darkness probably safety-wise is not recommended, and therefore having some light is essential, but minimizing its disruptive effects for sleep would be a good consideration. And one way of doing so is to try to at least reduce its melanopic content, so the short wavelengths, as much as possible, and also try to have the light where it's needed, and so that's more on the road surface and not necessarily direct exposures from the fixtures to the eyes of the individual. I think that's an important consideration. And by the way, if you compare light levels, outdoor civil twilight typically is about 500 lux. And that's roughly the amount of light that we are accepting to have in indoor environments where there is no daylight. We think 500 lux is enough. I mean, it's good to realize that basically we are saying that civil twilight is sufficient for us to meet our visual needs, at least in the indoor environments. And I think biologically speaking, this is highly questionable whether that indeed is sufficient.
Yeah, I have to step in on that one, because I think to compare the indoor lighting with the exterior lighting and the light levels doesn't work. Because if you ask people for the indoor environment, if they are working in 1000 lux environment, they feel discomfort, glary, because they have the contrast if they going to other areas, or the indoor environment is perceived completely different than the exterior. So I think it would be the mimicking in light levels is not the same. We really have to take in consideration the perception and also the contrast in a way, and how working environments really work. I'm very tense to the topic that the people are saying, oh, do the office lighting 2000 and have shift workers in the more bluish environment, or that they are working at like 2000 lux. I think that is, but this is more the personal feedback I get from our projects is it's a lot of times it's really too bright, it's glary, it's discomfort. Clients feel annoyed, the workers. I think in production, sometimes I can see it, but in office environment, I think it could be like one area, but not the whole environment. The other thing where I think we have also responsibility to be extremely careful with the energy we are using. So for that reason, this is also the very good part of the whole darkness movement is also we start to be more careful with the energy we are consuming. And I think it's not part of our talk at the moment, but I think we have that responsibility to be extremely careful. And what I take with me is also that we'll better have a look to the components, the spectrometer, that it is like a high quality LED module we are using, then always increasing light levels in that way.
But it isn't for increasing light levels also thinking about the directionality of the lighting and the contrast of lighting very often is not taking along when increasing in illuminance of or output of lighting installations. So I think if you look at an outdoor environment or a few thousand lux on a cloudy day, and people are not complaining about visual discomfort there. And I think indoor lighting designs could also benefit from knowing that the outdoor light environment can provide very high illuminances without visual discomfort is something we should also try to achieve in the indoor environment.
I personally think I have to say we did some, or say it that way, we did in our office. I can tell you a little story of our office. We had like a backlit ceiling in our lobby, and we could create like 2000 lux with it. And because we thought it has no windows, the lobby. So our secretary could have that really bright feeling. She was complaining that it was really glary, very uncomfortable. So we lowered the light level. And we heard also from other projects where it is not always that people want to sit in the sun to work and to have like 100,000 lux in a working environment. So I would be also in the energy discussion. I think we should be extremely careful to raise. We see that in the regulations that the lux levels are raising, and I think it's more about using our design intelligence to do the perception brighter, but it doesn't have to be the light levels. I think we should be more responsible that we achieve that the perception is far higher than what you are measuring. Might be I'm wrong with that, but I think that should be one of the strategies of the lighting community, that it is about the design and what our visual comfort is, the dynamic, and it's not only what we are measuring, it's a lot of the design, and the components have to be very good and responsible used.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's fair comment to say that the impression of the environment definitely is perhaps equally important as compared to the amount of actual exposure one receives at the eye. And both probably are acting on both visual and non-visual effects of light or environments on people in indoor settings. In view of time, I've seen there is a very lively discussion in the chat, and there are many questions coming in. There are quite a few questions that have been asked that have not been answered. We will try to address those by email, or at least provide some answers from the panelists to those questions and document that somewhere. Right now I mean, to close off at 4:30, I'd like to thank all speakers and panelists for the discussions. I don't know whether there are any important remarks that each, just making a quick round to the panelists, whether there's still something you would like to add to the discussion before we close down. Christina, would there be anything that you would like to place as a remark from your end?
I think I would just like to emphasize that, because I'm also seeing patients suffering from insomnia, and I think that really, although daylight may not be the cure, but light is really a very, very low level intervention. It doesn't cost anything if we consider natural daylight. So I can really highly recommend to pay more attention to our daily, say, light diet, or and try to get some daylight at least. For example, walk to the office and back, or take the bike, because that should really also have already beneficial effects on sleep.
Yeah, thanks for that comment, Christina. Koosje, would you have a closing comment for the audience?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me and for all your enthusiastic questions. It was really nice to hear and to see how the interests converge, like between users of lights, lightning, entrepreneurs, but also like ourselves and our environment. I think there's still indeed a lot of low-hanging fruit in terms of saving energy, but also directing light better, and without lighting more, necessarily lighting in a way that's better for us and for our environment. So let's pick the low-hanging fruit first and leave the harder decisions still later.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Koosje. And Carla, may I invite you to give a last, or for a final comment, if you have one?
Yeah, I would like to thank our panelists. I think it was really inspiring, and I think what is really great if we can learn from each other far more closer, and that science and design is really merging in a new opportunity for us lighting designers. And I learned a lot of things today, and I'm very grateful for that. And thank you, and also for having me on the panel.
Okay. Well, then I mean, as a final closing of this event, I'd like to thank all speakers and panelists and also everyone in the audience and still online for staying with us till the end and asking all these questions. We'll try to address them afterwards and provide a written response to the questions that we receive. We will also be trying to make the lecture material available as much as possible, and please stay tuned and have a look at DeLighted Talks website, where we will announce how the lectures materials can be made available, and also we will probably announce where the information on relating to the questions that were not addressed so far can be found. With that, I'd like to thank everyone for their active participation, and I think it was a fun discussion and definitely merits probably to be continued in the future. So I hope we'll meet again and be in touch on the same topic. And thank you all for joining. Stay healthy and safe, and take care, and hopefully see you next time. Goodbye, everyone, and thank you for participating.
Bye.